Okay. Hi again. Let's now move to Hamlet. Last time we stopped, I remember, at Act 1, Scene 3. And you remember that scene, which is also significant and important in the play. Not the most significant, but it is important, and it introduced us to filial bonds, relationships between family members, between son and father, but also between brother and sister. And we have seen, of course, the kind of family hierarchy that is being established. Of course, it's a patriarchal society, and you have, of course, the woman probably at the base of the pyramid, and she is receiving Ophelia. I'm speaking about, of course, Ophelia, and she is receiving instructions and advice from both from her father, but also from her brother. We also spoke about a kind of juxtaposition or opposition in character between Laertes and Hamlet. We said that, of course, you remember when we talked about man of action and a man of thought. And I believe that, of course, while Hamlet is rather a man of thought, a man who thinks twice before taking any action, or maybe even he thinks too much and never takes any action. But Laertes is, I believe, the opposite. He's a man of action. He's a man of doing, and we will see later, of course, in the play, how he, of course, would proceed to action very quickly and immediately without thinking. He's also, in the discussion with his sister, he's also affectionate and emotional. And so these are the characteristics of somebody, of course, who does not rely on reason, on thought, but who is a man of action and also an emotional man. And later he will take revenge, and immediately after the death of his father. So today we want to move to the following, to Act 1, Scene 4 and 5, because they are linked and they are also important in terms of the plot, because here we are going now to have a meeting between Hamlet and the ghost for the first time. And Hamlet is going, of course, here to learn about the revenge story and about the duty that he has to fulfill. If you, of course, I think you read the whole play, but now, of course, every time you need to reread the passage that we're going to analyze and to focus on. So please, you can again pause the video and go and read again Scene 4 and Scene 5 of the first act. And then you can come back. So Scene 4 actually is set in a platform before the castle. It's in front of the castle. And here we have, of course, the meeting, as I said, between Hamlet and the ghost of his father. We have a discussion, of course, a preliminary discussion between Hamlet and Horatio, and before the ghost appears. But one interesting and important thing that happens before the ghost appears here in Scene 4, in the beginning of Scene 4, is that while Hamlet and Horatio were discussing, they hear, of course, you can read here, a flourish of trumpets and ordnance, and shut off within the background. So they hear a lot of noise, and a noise of celebration and boisterous voices. And of course, Horatio, as a stranger, as an outsider, asks the reason for it, because of course we're speaking about midnight. We're speaking about, of course, a very late hour in the night, and because of course Hamlet is here in order to wait for the ghost, and they hear this noise. And in the explanation here, we learn, of course, that it's a tradition. It's a tradition in Denmark for the new king to celebrate and to drink by night, and we have also a kind of assessment by Hamlet in this dialogue, when Hamlet starts to explain to Horatio what was happening. But in addition to explanation, he gives, of course, some judgments about this new king and this habit. This is a habit, but he is against it. So Hamlet says, of course, to Horatio that this is something traditional. It's the tradition for the new king to celebrate by night, probably all night long. And but Hamlet, after explaining that, he expresses his rejection of such a habit, of such a custom, and he believes that it's rather better to get rid of such a habit. And you can read this, of course, in the discussion. Horatio says, "Is it a custom?" He said, "Yes, but to my mind, though I am native here." So, although of course he is Danish, and he is of course native to the land, but still he believes that this is something bad, and he believes that this habit of drinking would actually make a kind of bad reputation about the kingdom and probably would actually harm the kingdom rather than do it any good, to have the reputation of being drunkards. And it's of course about Danish culture and Danish and Scandinavian culture and Scandinavian also habits. And he goes on explaining and this as a bad habit. He believes that when the king behaves so, of course it's going to harm, as I said, the reputation of the kingdom, and it's going to probably give a bad impression to other people about this kingdom. But as he goes on and on explaining this negative attitude and this negative habit, then the ghost appears, and there are some metaphors used by Hamlet and descriptions that we will see in scene 4 here in the beginning, but also in the rest of scene 4, and also in scene 5, how Hamlet actually uses, even in the use of words, of course, you know that you have to also pay attention to the words and to the descriptions used, that we could see that Hamlet was very judgmental and had a very negative view about his uncle. Well, enter ghost, and then of course Hamlet for the first time is going to see the ghost, and you can read here how he was astonished and how he was actually panicking. "Angels and ministers of grace," he says, "defend us. Be thou spirit of health or goblin damned. Are you an evil ghost or a good ghost? I don't know." This is what he's saying. And I'm sorry. And here, of course, starts again this alternation, this wavering between belief and non-belief, again, this main theme of the play. If Hamlet is supposed to believe in what he's seeing or not, if it is just probably the making of his own imagination. And this is, of course, what he's going to say later, of course, while wavering, while vacillating between these two options, whether it's a real ghost or it's, of course, probably his own imagination, his own hallucination. And he then, of course, the ghost starts to beckon to Hamlet to tell him, "Come here," of course, by gesture only. And we understand later that he wants only, the ghost only wants to speak to Hamlet by himself. And this is also very significant. He's not going to tell him the secret in front of the others. Well, this is something when you take it literally, but of course it also means that probably what is going to happen later is only the hallucination of Hamlet, and not really something that really happened. So we see the most interesting thing in this very short part is how Hamlet is not afraid of death, how Hamlet is not afraid of the supernatural at all. And his two friends here, his two companions, Horatio and Marcellus, warn him against going with the ghost, because the ghost was beckoning him and telling him to come with him, but in order, of course, maybe to tell him the secret, and this is what's going to happen. But the two companions warned him not to go, because this could be probably very dangerous. We don't know what would happen to him. So, but Hamlet here, Hamlet says, of course, "I don't care about my life here." He says, "I do not set my life at a pin's fee, and for my soul, what can it do to that? being a thing immortal as itself. So he said, well, again, this is philosophizing again, because it's again between death and life, between life and death, and it's again between reality and imagination, and between what would happen to a person, what would be the worst thing that would happen to a person. So if he gives, of course, you see the cogitation here, how he's thinking, how he is being an intellectual person, a thinking person. So in of course, in confronting evil or danger. So he says, on the one hand, if it's going to harm me as a physical body, I don't care about my life. I don't care about my physical life. On the other hand, if it's going, when we think about my soul, my spirit, what could it do to me, to my soul, to my spirit? It's immortal itself, and the soul is immortal, so it cannot do anything to me. On the level of the supernatural, on the level of the spiritual, but on the level of the physical, I don't care. So you see, although of course we understand that he's not afraid at all, but we also understand that he's always cogitating. This is like a syllogism, an Aristotelian syllogism. It's like a mathematical equation, that he's always thinking in this way. We could see later that he's always thinking in this mathematical way. Trying to calculate all the options before, of course, taking any action. And this is, of course, what led him by the end to procrastination, not to take any action, because he's over-calculating. He's calculating too much. That's the idea. So before we move to scene 5 and the encounter between Hamlet and his father's ghost, we have to say that, as I said, while Hamlet is not afraid at all, we could see, of course, the attitude of Horatio and Marcellus, who are probably, between quotation marks, of course, normal people who are afraid of this supernatural apparition. And this is, of course, probably the voice of reason, because they are here begging him not to go with a ghost. And here but of course he wants to go, and he wants to know the truth of this ghost, and what actually the ghost comes with as a message to him. But also here, before we move to scene 5, there is a very famous, probably the most famous, one of the most famous quotations from the book. It's when Marcellus here, if you read just before scene 5, as I said, when Marcellus says, "Something's rotten in the state of Denmark." This is a very famous and frequently quoted statement, and it's used today, of course, even in politics or in other discourses. It means today, of course, not only here, but in general, it means there's something wrong, there's something that is not clear about any issue, about any political issue or any other kind of issue. Something's rotten in the state of Denmark. And here probably we start with those very frequently cited quotation that we find in the book, as I told you before. Now we move to scene 5. And here we have, of course, Hamlet and the ghost by themselves. What I'd like to say is that while reading this scene and other scenes, of course, we don't have to forget that dichotomy between reality and imagination. We always, of course, as we read this scene and other scenes, we will think about the reality of the ghost. Is this real or not? And there, of course, you will find arguments for and arguments against. You will find hints, you will find clues that tell you that yes, the ghost is real, and other, of course, clues that would tell you that no, probably this is just Hamlet's hallucination. And this is, of course, the crisis that Hamlet finds himself in the first place before the reader. And so when we start reading scene 5, we first of all, in my opinion, we see a kind of dramatization. Of course, no need, of course, to summarize what's going to happen. Of course, you know what's going to happen in scene 5. The ghost is going to tell Hamlet, of course, that he was killed by Hamlet's uncle, and also he's going to ask him for revenge. That's of course in brief what's going to happen in scene 5. But how this is going to happen, how this is going to be, of course, dramatized by Shakespeare, of course, that's the question. But this is a summary of scene 5 and what happens in scene 5. So what I'd like to say, as I said, first of all, is that I believe that the ghost here, while describing what happened, the murder, he's dramatizing things, he's exaggerating, trying to make a whole, I believe, show of this murder. And he speaks about the very small details of the murder. He goes into the details, and he uses also exaggeration. So you have just to read how he explains. He's using also probably a kind of dramatic strategy in telling, using a lot of techniques of narration in order to make Hamlet probably react to that emotionally. So we see this. We see probably if we try to discuss this attitude, and if we try to discuss this style of narrating what happened to Hamlet, we could say that we could also argue that this could not be Hamlet's father, I believe, because a father would not actually push his son to something bad. And so there is exaggeration, and we understand that the ghost of Hamlet now spends his time in the purgatory, that place between this word and the other word, between this word and heaven and hell. The purgatory in Christian belief, of course, the verb is to purge away sins, etc., which is a place where you are cleaned before the judgment comes, whether to go to heaven or to hell. So he is now spending his time there, and he says, so he explains this: I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night, and for the day confined to fasting fires, till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away. But that I am forbid to tell the secrets of my prison house. I could tell, of course, I could tell, unfold, whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul, freeze thy young blood. This is now speaking about, he is now speaking, of course, about the murder. And look at the introduction he makes. I would a tale unfold whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul, freeze thy young blood. Don't you think there is exaggeration here? It would make thy two eyes like stars stir from their spheres, thy knot and combined locks to part, and each particular hair to stand and end like quills upon the fretful porcupine. So I believe that there is here, for sure, dramatization, exaggeration, and using dramatic techniques to make the story even more tragic, I believe. And why I'm saying this, because this could be taken as an argument against the belief in the reality of the ghost. Would a father tell his son this or not? But this eternal blazon must not be to ears of flesh and blood. List, Hamlet, oh list, if thou didst ever thy dear father love. There is a kind of emotional blackmailing also in this dialogue, manipulation. Because the ghost wants Hamlet to take revenge and not to forget him, while dramatizing the thing. Revenge, his foul, now the ghost says, revenge, his foul and most unnatural murder. Murder most, yes, he said, murder most foul, as in the best it is, but this most foul, strange and unnatural, etc. So later, of course, we see here also, on the other hand, that Hamlet does not question what he's actually being informed of. He takes it for granted, and because, of course, there could be some doubts. Maybe this is not real. Maybe the ghost is not real. Maybe it's not my father's ghost, etc. So, but we don't find this reaction, this kind of reaction from Hamlet. And of course, the ghost insists on revenge and asks Hamlet not to forget about the revenge, and trying to make Hamlet believe that if he forgets about revenge, it's going to be a kind of treason. of his father. So why I'm saying all this? So maybe it rings a bell that all this then probably is only the working of Hamlet's conscience and Hamlet's imagination and conscience, because Hamlet thinks that he needs to take revenge, that it's treason if he doesn't take revenge. Probably it's the works of his unconscious mind, and not really a real ghost that came to Hamlet to tell him this.